The cold decision city was awake. Cars rushed through the wide streets, horns echoing in the distance. Inside the tallest glass tower, the morning sun painted golden lines across the marble floor. The air smelled of polish and coffee. The workers hurried in with files and laptops, but in the corner of the building, another group stood quietly, the cleaners. Their faded uniforms carried the scent of soap and dust. Their hands were rough, their shoes old, but their eyes were honest. They stood in a straight line, waiting. None of them spoke loudly. Only the sound of shifting feet and soft coughs filled the lobby. They had all heard the rumors. Something was coming. Something bad died at the very top floor. Jonathan Blake, the millionaire, stood by the wide glass window of his office. He looked down at the people like they were ants crawling on the street below. His suit was sharp, his tie perfectly straight, but his face was hard as stone, his lips pressed into a thin line, his jaw tight. Jonathan had built this empire with his own hands. He told himself he had fought in boardrooms, crushed his rivals, and turned his small company into a giant tower of success. But lately, the company profits were falling. His advisors whispered about cost-cutting. Jonathan did not like to hear those words. But deep inside, fear was eating him. Fear of losing control. Fear of being seen as weak. And so he had made a decision, a cold decision. The cleaners would be gone out to him. They were not important. They did not bring money. They only swept floors, wiped tables, and polished glass. Any agency could replace them for half the price. Why keep people who added no value? He turned from the window, his leather shoes clicking against the floor. His secretary, nervous and pale, stood by the door. "Sir, they are waiting in the lobby." Jonathan's eyes did not soften. "Call them up. All of them. Let's finish this." Moments later, the cleaners walked into the conference hall. The room was large, with a long shining table and walls covered in framed awards. But the cleaners did not belong here. Their clothes looked plain, their faces tired. Some of them bowed their heads, afraid to look directly at the boss. Others tried to stand tall, hiding their trembling hands. Among them was Samuel. He was older than the rest, his hair peppered with gray. His uniform was neat, though worn out, and his eyes were steady. He had been in this building longer than most of the managers. For 20 years, he had polished its windows until they shone like mirrors. He had carried buckets heavier than his own children, yet he had never once complained. Jonathan sat at the head of the table. He did not ask them to sit. He folded his hands and cleared his throat. The sound echoed across the silent room. "You are all fired," he said flatly. "From tomorrow, your services will not be needed." The words struck like ice. A woman gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Another man shook his head slowly, as if refusing to believe. One of the younger cleaners muttered, "But sir, my wife, she just had a baby." His voice cracked. But Jonathan did not look at him. A heavy silence followed. The sound of rain tapping on the glass windows filled the emptiness. Jonathan's eyes swept across the faces. He saw fear, confusion, sadness, but he felt nothing. His heart was locked, buried under years of pride and ambition. He thought, "If I show mercy, they will see me as weak." A leader must cut without hesitation. Samuel finally lifted his voice. "Sir," he said, calm but firm, "we have served this place for years. We are not just workers. We are human beings. We kept this building clean so your guests could walk in with respect. We stayed late so your meetings would shine. Do we not deserve at least your gratitude?" Jonathan's eyes narrowed. For a moment, he almost flinched at Samuel's words. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that Samuel was right, but pride was stronger. "Gratitude doesn't pay bills." Jonathan replied coldly, "You are dismissed. That is final." The cleaners lowered their heads. Some wiped away tears silently. The woman who gasped earlier now sobbed quietly, clutching her small purse as if it were the last thing she owned. Samuel did not cry. He stood still, his hands folded in front of him. His face was calm, but his heart was heavy. One day, he thought, the truth will show him that people matter more than power. Jonathan rose from his chair. The meeting was over. The sound of his footsteps leaving the room echoed like thunder. Behind him, the cleaners shuffled out slowly, carrying not just their empty bags, but also their broken hopes. The tower still stood tall, shining against the stormy sky. But inside, something unseen had cracked. Jonathan believed he had made a wise, strong choice. He did not know that this cold decision would soon return to him, not in numbers, not in profits, but in a way that would pierce his heart forever. A house full of silence. Jonathan Blake's mansion looked like a palace from the outside. Its white walls stretched high, tall pillars guarded the entrance, and golden lamps glowed at the gate. Expensive cars rested in the driveway, shining under the soft evening light. From a distance, it seemed like the home of a man who had everything: wealth, comfort, success. But inside, silence ruled. The wide living room, with its sparkling chandeliers and soft leather couches, felt empty. The walls echoed with nothing but the hum of air conditioning. No laughter, no warmth, just silence. Heavy and cold. At the center of this silence was Lily, Jonathan's only daughter. She was 12 years old, fragile and thin, lying in her soft bed covered with pale sheets, a scarf wrapped around her bald head, hiding the truth that cancer had taken her hair. Her eyes, once full of joy, now looked tired, heavy with pain. Jonathan sat at the edge of her bed. He wore the same expensive suit from work, but his shoulders were slouched, his tie loosened. His face, usually so proud in the office, now looked lost. He watched his daughter breathe slowly, her small chest rising and falling with effort. "Daddy," Lily whispered, her voice faint. "Will I get better soon?" The question pierced Jonathan's heart. He wanted to smile, to tell her, "Yes, my princess, you'll be fine." But his lips would not move. His throat tightened. He could not lie to her, yet he could not tell her the truth either. So he simply held her tiny hand in both of his. His hands were large, cold, and tired. Her hand was warm, soft, and trembling. He kissed her knuckles gently. "Rest now, sweetheart," he whispered. Lily gave a weak smile, but her eyes closed. Slowly, as if even smiling cost her strength, Jonathan leaned back in the chair beside her bed. His heart felt like a stone. He could command a room of businessmen. He could make deals worth millions. But here, beside his daughter, he was helpless. All the money in the world could not cure her. In the hallway, the nurses moved quietly. Their white uniforms were spotless, their steps quick, but their faces showed no emotion. They did their jobs, gave medicine, checked charts, and left. To them, Lily was only a patient, not a child fighting for her life. Jonathan noticed this. He noticed their lack of warmth, their mechanical smiles, their eyes fixed more on the clock than on his daughter. But he said nothing. He had chosen them, hired the best professionals money could buy. Still, the mansion felt more like a hospital than a home. Jonathan walked out of Lily's room and stood by the balcony. The night had fallen. The garden below was lit by small golden lamps. Flowers bloomed in neat rows, watered by sprinklers. But they seemed lifeless. The beauty of the garden could not fill the emptiness in his heart. For a moment, Jonathan thought about the cleaners he had fired that morning. He pictured their faces, lined with worry, their eyes filled with tears. They had worked with loyalty, day after day, year after year. Some of them probably earned just enough to feed their families, and yet he had dismissed them with a single sentence. "Why am I thinking about them now?" he muttered to himself, but deep down, he knew why. He remembered how some of them used to smile kindly at Lily when she visited the office. As a little girl, he remembered Samuel, the older cleaner, who once bent down to fix Lily's broken toy horse when she dropped it in the lobby. At the time, Jonathan had brushed it off as nothing, but now the memory struck him like a soft knock on his locked heart. He shook his head, forcing the thought away. They were only cleaners. What difference could they make? Just then, Lily's weak voice called from her room. "Daddy." Jonathan hurried back. Lily was sitting up, her eyes watery. "Can you tell me a story?" she asked. Jonathan froze. He hadn't told her a story in years. His wife had passed away when Lily was only 6, and since then, Jonathan had buried himself in work, stories, laughter, simple joys. He had forgotten them all. He sat on the bed, searching his memory. Finally, he whispered, "Once upon a time, there was a brave little bird who lost all her feathers in a storm. Everyone thought she could never fly again, but she was strong. She flapped her tiny wings every day, and slowly they grew back, and one day she flew higher than all the others." Lily smiled softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Like me?" she asked. Jonathan swallowed hard. He nodded quickly, pulling her into his arms. "Yes, my princess, just like you." In that moment, Jonathan felt something break inside him. Not his strength, but his pride. He realized he had a palace filled with silence, a heart filled with fear, and a daughter filled with hope dying. And he knew, somehow, that the cold decisions he made earlier that day would come back to him. The people he had thrown away, the ones he thought were unimportant, would soon be part of his greatest test. The mansion stood tall, glowing under the night sky. But inside, a battle was quietly unfolding, a battle of wealth versus love, pride versus kindness, and fear versus hope. Jonathan did not know it yet, but the silence of his home would soon be broken, not by doctors or money, but by a man he had already cast aside. The day of the fourth rain had been falling since morning. Heavy gray clouds covered the sky, and the world outside Jonathan's mansion looked dull and sad. Drops of water raced down the tall glass windows, each one breaking into smaller streams, just like the hidden tears that often filled the house. Inside, Lily sat by the window in her small wheelchair. She wore a pale blue dress that used to be her favorite. Now it hung loosely on her weak body. She watched the rain with tired eyes. Once, she loved rainy days. She would jump in puddles, laugh, and spin around in the garden. But now, she could only press her little palm against the cold glass and whisper, "It's so far away." Her father, Jonathan, was pacing the hallway. The sound of his shoes clicked against the marble floor. He had been on the phone with doctors, investors, and managers all morning, his voice sharp and restless. But every few minutes, he glanced at Lily. He wanted to say something comforting, but the words always got trapped behind the wall of his pride. "Daddy," Lily called softly. Jonathan stopped. "Yes, sweetheart, can I go to the garden? Just for a little while. I want to feel the rain." Jonathan hesitated. The garden was slippery, dangerous. His daughter was too weak, too fragile, but the hope in her eyes broke him. He nodded slowly, "Only for a few minutes. I'll call the nurse to help." The nurse appeared, holding Lily's scarf and umbrella, but her steps were stiff, her face expressionless. She wheeled Lily toward the wide staircase that led down to the garden. Jonathan followed behind, his heart tight. At that moment, time betrayed him. Halfway down the stairs, Lily's small hands trembled on the chair. She tried to stand, but her thin legs gave way. The scarf slipped from her head, revealing her bald scalp. Her eyes widened with sudden fear. "Daddy," she cried, her voice echoing in the grand hall. Jonathan froze. His heart stopped beating for a second. He saw his daughter's fragile body tilt forward, her foot sliding on the wet marble step. The nurse gasped, but she was too far away. Everything slowed down. The sound of rain outside turned into a loud drumbeat in Jonathan's ears. His vision blurred. He saw his little girl falling, his treasure, his only child, about to hit the stone floor. And then it happened. Two strong arms shot out from the side. A man moved with the speed of instinct, catching Lily just before her head touched the hard ground. His body took the weight, his grip steady and gentle. Lily gasped, her small hands clinging to the man's shirt. Her heartbeat raced against his chest, but she was safe. Jonathan blinked, shocked. It was not the nurse. It was not a doctor. It was Samuel, the cleaner, the man Jonathan had fired. Samuel stood there, soaked in rainwater, his uniform damp and worn. His breath was heavy, but his eyes were calm, filled with kindness. He held Lily as if she were his own child. "You're safe now, little one," Samuel whispered softly, his voice warm like a blanket on a cold night. Lily looked up at him, her lips trembling. Thank you," she whispered, tears rolling down her pale cheeks. Jonathan's throat tightened. His mind spun in disbelief. This was the man he had dismissed without a second thought, the man he believed was worthless. Yet here he was, cradling the most precious life in Jonathan's world. The nurse stood frozen, her face pale with guilt. She had not moved in time, but Samuel, a man with nothing left, had moved without hesitation. Jonathan stepped forward, his voice breaking. "Samuel, what are you doing here?" Samuel slowly placed Lily back into her wheelchair, careful as though setting down a glass flower. He straightened up, rain dripping from his sleeves. "I came to collect my last pay, sir," Samuel said, quietly, bowing his head. "But when I saw Miss Lily fall, I couldn't stand by." Jonathan stared at him, speechless. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. For years, he had believed money and power solved everything. But in this single moment, he realized something different. His daughter's life was saved not by wealth, not by professionals, but by a man he had cast aside like dust. Lily reached out and touched Samuel's hand. Her small voice trembled, but her eyes shone. "You smell like lemon soap," she said. Samuel smiled gently. "That's from the floors I've cleaned all these years. It's the smell of work, little one." Jonathan felt his eyes burn. He quickly turned away, ashamed of the tears threatening to fall. His pride told him not to cry, but his heart was breaking open. The storm outside grew louder, thunder rolling across the sky. But inside that mansion, another storm was brewing, a storm in Jonathan's soul. He had made a cold decision to fire the cleaners. Yet now, one of them had saved his world in a single act of love. Jonathan knew nothing would ever be the same again. The forgotten kindness storm outside calmed by evening. But inside Jonathan's heart the storm only grew stronger. The image of Samuel catching Lily replayed again and again in his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his daughter falling and Samuel's arms reaching out like a shield. Jonathan had returned to his study, a large room filled with shelves of books, awards, and framed pictures of business victories. Normally, he felt powerful here, but tonight, he felt small. His hands shook as he poured himself a glass of water. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profits or rivals. He was thinking about a cleaner. Meanwhile, in Lily's room, Samuel sat beside her bed. The nurses had left after giving medicine, but Lily had begged for him to stay. She felt safe around him, as if he carried a light that the nurses did not have. "Tell me a story," Lily whispered, her eyes wide. With hope, Samuel chuckled softly. "What story do you want to hear, little one?" "Something happy," she said. So Samuel told her about his childhood, about chasing butterflies in the fields of his village, about running barefoot on the wet soil after rain, about his mother baking bread that filled the whole house with a smell so sweet it could make anyone smile. Lily's face glowed with joy as she listened, her weak body shaking with soft laughter. Jonathan walked in quietly and stood at the door. He saw his daughter, laughing a sound he had not heard in weeks. Her pale face looked brighter. Her eyes sparkled like they used to. And the man bringing this joy was the very man Jonathan had dismissed like a shadow. A deep pain pricked Jonathan's chest. "How blind I have been," he thought. "This man gave what money cannot buy." Later that night, after Lily fell asleep, Jonathan asked Samuel to step into the hallway. The marble floor reflected their figures, one tall and polished in a suit, the other humble in a worn-out uniform. "Why did you stay, Samuel?" Jonathan asked. His voice was softer than usual, almost broken. Samuel bowed his head. "Sir, I know I was dismissed, but when I saw Miss Lily falling, I didn't think. I only knew I had to save her. I couldn't watch her get hurt." Jonathan looked at him carefully. He searched for anger, for bitterness in Samuel's face, but he found none, only kindness, only respect. For a moment, Jonathan was pulled back into memory. Years ago, when Lily was just a little girl with golden hair and giggles like bells, she often came to the office to see him. She would run down the halls, her small shoes tapping against the tiles. The managers would frown, but Samuel would smile and kneel to greet her. He remembered a day when Lily had dropped her toy horse on the lobby floor. Its leg broke off. Jonathan had been too busy signing documents to notice her tears, but Samuel had picked it up, pulled out a small roll of tape from his cleaning cart, and gently fixed it. He had handed it back to her with a smile. "There you go, little princess, good as new." Lily had hugged him, her laughter filling the air. Jonathan had brushed it aside back then, thinking it was nothing. But tonight, that memory came back, like a knife to his pride. He realized Samuel had been showing kindness for years, quietly, without asking for anything in return. "Samuel," Jonathan said slowly, "I wronged you." Samuel raised his eyes, surprised. Jonathan Blake never admitted mistakes, not to board members, not to rivals, not to anyone. "I fired you without a thought," Jonathan continued, his voice heavy with regret. "I thought you were just a cleaner. But tonight, you reminded me of something I forgot. People matter. Kindness matters. And you saved my daughter." Samuel shook his head gently. "Sir, I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it was right. I have a daughter too. She is grown now. But when I see Miss Lily, I see her in my heart. No father should feel the pain of losing a child." Jonathan's eyes burned. He quickly looked away, ashamed of the tears forming. His pride tried to silence them, but his heart was louder now. "Samuel," He whispered, I owe you more than I can say. Samuel only smiled softly, as if saving Lily was reward enough. That night, Jonathan could not sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his grand bedroom. The rain had stopped, and the world outside was calm, but inside him, memories kept surfacing. He remembered how the cleaners always greeted him with respect, even when he ignored them. He remembered how they worked late at night, their footsteps soft, so meetings would not be disturbed. He remembered how Samuel once stayed behind during a storm, making sure the lobby was safe. When water leaked in, while Jonathan drove away in his luxury car without a second glance. All these forgotten kindnesses now returned, one by one, like ghosts knocking on his heart. He realized something terrible, that he had lived his life blind. He had built walls of money and power, but in doing so, he had shut out the very things that mattered most: love, loyalty, kindness. Jonathan turned his face to the side and whispered into the empty room, God, forgive me. I forgot to see the people who carried me when I thought I stood alone. His mansion stood quiet, but within him, a seed had been planted, a seed of humility, a seed of change, and it all began with the forgotten kindness of a man he once believed was worth nothing. The truth in tears night stretched long and heavy inside Jonathan Blake's mansion. Though the world outside was quiet, inside his chest a storm refused to rest. He sat in the dimly lit study, a glass of wine untouched on the table. His hands rubbed his temples, his eyes staring into nothing. The air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth drifting in through the open balcony. Doors. No business report lay before him. No laptop glowed with numbers. Tonight, his thoughts were not of profit or loss. They were of Samuel. Jonathan had always believed money was the sharpest weapon, the strongest shield. But in a single moment, Samuel, a man with nothing, had shown him that courage and kindness were far greater. He closed his eyes, and Lily's laughter drifted through his memory. He had heard it just hours ago when Samuel told her stories. That sound had been rare in this house of silence for weeks. It was medicine no doctor could prescribe. Jonathan whispered to himself, how could I be so blind? How could I throw away men like him, men who gave more heart than anyone in my empire? In Lily's room, the night was softer. A small lamp glowed on the bedside table. The air smelled faintly of medicine mixed with lavender oil. Lily lay resting, her breath slow but steady. At her side, Samuel sat in the chair, humming an old tune from his childhood. His eyes, though tired, stayed warm as he watched over her. Suddenly, Lily stirred. She opened her eyes and whispered, Uncle Samuel, are you still here? Yes, little one, Samuel said gently. I'm here. Lily smiled weakly. I feel safe when you're here. Samuel's heart tightened. His own daughter, years ago, had once said those same words when she was afraid of storms. He brushed away the memory quickly, focusing on the fragile girl before him. Sleep now, he whispered. I'll keep watch. Jonathan walked in quietly. He paused at the door, watching. His daughter's pale face glowed faintly under the light, her small smile softening the sharp lines of her suffering. Beside her sat Samuel, steady as a mountain, kind as a river. Something broke inside Jonathan at that sight. His chest tightened, his throat ached. He stepped closer, his voice trembling. Samuel. Samuel looked up, surprised. Yes, sir. Jonathan swallowed hard, fighting his pride. He sat on the edge of the bed and touched Lily's hand. All my life, he began slowly, I thought strength was money. I thought success meant cutting away the weak. But tonight, I see the truth. My strength is nothing compared to what you gave me. You gave me my daughter back. You gave her laughter back. His voice cracked. For the first time in years, Jonathan Blake, the man who ruled boardrooms, who fired people with one cold sentence, could not hold back tears. They rolled down his face, hot and heavy, dripping on Lily's small fingers. He pressed her hand to his forehead, breaking down in silence. Daddy, Lily whispered, half awake, half dreaming. Her hand squeezed his weakly. Don't cry. I'll be okay. You always told me I was brave. Jonathan's tears grew stronger. He had never felt so helpless, yet so human. Samuel sat quietly, his own eyes wet, though he looked away to give father and daughter their moment. Later, when Lily drifted back to sleep, Jonathan stepped into the hallway with Samuel. The night air outside carried the smell of wet grass and roses from the garden. The lamps along the walls flickered, throwing soft shadows across the marble floor. Samuel, Jonathan said, his voice low and shaky, You have no idea what you've done for me. You didn't just save my daughter from a fall. You saved me from myself, from the man I was becoming." Samuel shook his head gently. "Sir, I did what any father would do. When I saw her falling, I saw my own child in her. I could not stand still." Jonathan's heart ached with guilt. He remembered the day he had fired them all, the looks on their faces, the tears they held back, and Samuel standing tall, calm, his words echoing. "We are not just workers. We are human beings." Those words returned now with sharp truth. Jonathan turned to Samuel, his eyes red but steady. "I don't deserve your kindness. I treated you as nothing, and yet you gave me everything." Samuel placed a hand over his chest and spoke with quiet dignity. "Sir, kindness is not given because it is deserved. It is given because it is right." The words sank deep into Jonathan's heart, shaking the very foundation of his pride. As Jonathan returned to his room, he stood by the window, looking out at the dark garden. Drops of water still clung to the flowers, shining under the lamp like tiny pearls. He remembered Lily's words earlier, "Like me," when he told her the story of the bird that flew again. He realized then that hope was not built on wealth. It was built on small acts of love, like Samuel fixing a broken toy, like Samuel catching a child, like Samuel sitting by her bed so she could sleep without fear. The truth was clear now, and it brought him to his knees. Jonathan dropped onto the carpet, buried his face in his hands, and let the tears fall freely. They were not tears of shame anymore. They were tears of awakening. For the first time in his life, Jonathan Blake, the man the city called untouchable, was truly touched. And the man who touched him was not a millionaire, not a doctor, not a rival. It was a cleaner, a man of forgotten worth, a man whose kindness had become the truth in his tears. The final change as morning sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Its light touched the mansion windows, making them glow as if the house itself was waking from a long, heavy sleep. Inside, however, Jonathan Blake was already awake. He had not closed his eyes all night. He sat in his study, but unlike before, no papers, no contracts, no profit charts filled the table. Instead, he sat with silence, his thoughts circling around the same truth. Wealth had never made him powerful. It had made him blind. And a man he once dismissed as nothing had opened his eyes. Jonathan stood and walked to Lily's room. He pushed the door gently, careful not to wake her if she was still asleep. But Lily was awake, sitting up with her scarf slipping slightly from her bald head. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Daddy," she whispered, "you're here early." Jonathan smiled faintly. "I'm not leaving your side again." Beside her bed, Samuel was still there. His uniform was wrinkled, his eyes tired, but his presence was steady, comforting. He had stayed the entire night, humming softly whenever Lily stirred. Jonathan looked at him for a long moment. "Samuel, may I speak with you outside?" Samuel nodded, rising carefully so as not to disturb Lily, and followed Jonathan to the hallway. The hallway was quiet, lined with portraits of Jonathan's ancestors, serious men in suits, women in pearls, all painted with cold dignity. Jonathan stopped beneath one of the largest portraits and turned to Samuel. "Samuel," he began, his voice steady but heavy with emotion, "yesterday you saved my daughter's life, but you saved something else to my soul. I had forgotten what it meant to be human. I fired you and the others as if you were tools, not people. I was wrong. I was cruel." Samuel lowered his gaze humbly. "Sir, what's done is done. What matters is the little one is safe." But Jonathan shook his head. "No, Samuel, what matters is that I change. I cannot undo the hurt I caused, but I can choose who I will be from now on." For the first time in years, Jonathan Blake, the proud millionaire, bowed his head not in defeat, but in humility. His voice broke as he said, "Please forgive me." Samuel's eyes softened. He placed a hand gently on Jonathan's shoulder. "Forgiveness is already yours, sir. Kindness is never lost. It always finds its way back." Those words struck Jonathan's heart like a final key turning in a locked door. Later that morning, Jonathan gathered every worker he had fired. One by one, they walked nervously into the mansion, expecting more harshness, more humiliation. But instead, they found their boss standing in the middle of the grand hall, his daughter by his side in her wheelchair, and Samuel beside her. Jonathan's voice carried across the hall, but it was no longer cold. It was warm, broken, honest. "I wronged you," he began. "I forgot that behind every uniform is a human heart, a family, a life. I treated you as numbers, not people, and for that, I am deeply sorry." The cleaners exchanged shocked glances. They had never heard such words from him before. Jonathan continued, his eyes shining with emotion. "Yesterday, my daughter almost slipped from my hands forever, and the man who saved her was not a doctor, not a businessman, not someone rich. It was Samuel the cleaner, the man I fired." Gasps rippled through the group. Jonathan bent down beside Lily's wheelchair. "My daughter is alive because of him, because of his courage, and now I see that no job is small. No person is less. From today, you are not just workers in this house. You are family, and this home will be yours too, as much as it is mine." Tears streamed down the faces of the cleaners. Some clutched each other's hands, others bowed their heads, overcome with emotion. For the first time, they were not invisible. They were seen. Lily raised her small hand, her voice weak but clear. "Thank you, Uncle Samuel," she said, smiling at him. "You gave me back my daddy too." Samuel's eyes glistened. He knelt beside her, taking her tiny hand in both of his. "No, little one," he whispered. "It was your brave heart that gave him back to you." Jonathan's tears fell freely. Now, he no longer hid them. He looked at Samuel and said, "From today, you will not be a cleaner in this house. You will be part of this family. Whatever you need your daughter, your future I will provide." Samuel bowed his head, but his voice was steady. "Sir, I need nothing but the chance to serve with dignity. That is enough." Jonathan gripped his hand tightly, a handshake not of boss and servant, but of brothers. That evening, the mansion was no longer silent. Laughter filled the halls again. Lily, though still weak, smiled brighter than ever. The cleaners moved about not with fear, but with pride. The air smelled of fresh flowers from the garden, brought inside to brighten the rooms. Jonathan stood by the balcony, the setting sun warming his face. For the first time, he did not feel like a ruler sitting on a lonely throne. He felt like a father, a man, a human being. He turned to see Samuel walking with Lily in her wheelchair, telling her another story, her laughter echoing like bells. Jonathan whispered to himself, "This is the real wealth, not money, not power, but love, kindness, and the people who carry us when we fall." And with that, the man who once fired all his cleaners found himself forever changed by one act of forgotten kindness, an act that saved his daughter, his heart, and his soul.